Okay, put everything away. Get out one sheet of paper. Okay. So we have now, so hopefully you kind of have a visualization of the differences between the CNS and PNS. So when you think CNS, not in words, try to picture it. So when you see the CNS, that includes what? The brain and spinal cord. And the PNS are nerves and ganglia. So when you think about that, try to find a picture that you can just etch in your mind. Sometimes the words may not be there, but if you see this picture in your mind, it may help you to remember. So the CNS and the PNS. Now, we talked a little bit about how the nervous system works, how the CNS and PNS work together, and the role of the CNS and the PNS. So overall, from last time, we said the CNS is considered what? Good. Control center, command center, integration center. Does everybody understand why? What is it doing? Right, it sends out signals, but it also what? Receives signals and makes sense of the signals, interprets the signals that come in to the CNS from the rest of the body. Okay? So that's the CNS, and we'll see the spinal cord is just as involved, but the brain a lot more, and being the command center. And we'll see some examples of that, especially in reflexes, which we'll get to in chapter 13. But now, so that's the CNS, overall function, control. Now, what about the PNS? Not the ganglia. You really won't hear anything about ganglia too much, other than what it is, a bundle of what? Ganglia? Bundle of cell bodies, right. So that's about all you'll need to know about ganglia. That's where the cell bodies are located. But nerves, what do you know about nerves? Lots. For one, nerves are part of which division? The PNS, right? And what do we find inside nerves? Axons, right. Bundles of axons, a bunch of axons. So what is the function of those nerves? Very good. So the command center can't do anything if information doesn't get to it. So the brain can't process any information if the information doesn't make it to the brain. So I'm just trying to get you all to be clear on the role of the nerves. So as I said, if someone pinches your finger, the signal starts at the activation of the receptor, but that's not at the brain. So nothing's happening until that signal from that receptor makes it to the brain. So whose job is it to get the signal from my fingertip to the brain? Right. Initially, it's the role of the nerve. So nerves carry the signal from receptors to the CNS, right? That's half of the story. And then once the signal makes it to the brain, remember all this activity happens there with the brain trying to interpret the signal and then make a decision on what to do about that information that just came in. Then what? So then the brain does what? Sends a signal back down, right, to that area, right, to what particular thing in that area. Right, there you go. And the word is effector. So the brain sends signals to effectors, the CNS, not just the brain, but the CNS relays signals to our effectors, which are muscles or glands. Okay, so you do need to know that effectors are muscles and glands. And their job is what? That's another quiz question you may see Tuesday. What is the job of an effector? Right, to carry out the commands of the brain. So when the brain tells those effectors to do something, that's when they do it. Otherwise, they're just sitting there waiting for a signal. Okay? So muscles and glands are effectors. Their job is to respond to commands sent from the brain. All right, so how does a signal get from my CNS to an effector, to a muscle? Nerves. Okay? So now we see the importance of nerves. They transmit the signal to the CNS and away from the CNS, depending on what type of signal we're talking about. Now, so this slide goes over the PNS, specifically nerves, and just delves into the function of nerves. So there are two functional divisions of the PNS. And again, when you see PNS, for the most part, think nerves. So some of the nerves are going to do one job. Another set of nerves will do a different job. So the two divisions are, functional divisions are sensory and motor. And just by looking at those two words, you should have a sense of what is being referred to here. So sensory involves what? So the senses, right? And all sensation occurs first when what happens? What's the first thing that has to happen before? Right, so receptors have to be activated first. So anytime you see sensory, you should be thinking sensations, activation of receptors. Okay, so that's where the sensory division starts, at receptors. But what is the job of this sensory division? Sensory nerves, that is to transmit signals from the receptor to the CNS. Okay, so just pick any part of the body, fingertip. When you prick there, the reason you feel it is because the signal makes it to the brain. How does it do it? First, by a sensory nerve carrying the signal from the receptor to my CNS, and then from my spinal cord on up to the brain. Okay, that's the sensory division. Transmit signals from receptor to CNS. And then you have the motor division, just the word motor. If you think of anything having to do with the body that says motor, something should jump out at you. Movement. Okay, so movement of the body involves what? What are the main things of the body that control movement? Muscles. Okay, so the motor division has to do with signals to muscles. Okay, so what do we say in order for us to make any movement voluntarily? That signal starts where? Brain, CNS. So the motor division involves those nerves that have the job of transmitting a signal from what? From the CNS, which is my brain or spinal cord, on out to a muscle or gland, an effector. Okay, everybody get that? So the two divisions, the two major divisions of the PNS, again, we're talking about nerves. A set of nerves carry a signal from CNS to effector. Another set carries a signal from receptor to the CNS. And you should know what that is. So if I give you a similar type test on Tuesday, I'm going to have some of this in there. Okay, which division carries a signal from the receptor to the spinal cord? Sensory. Okay, notice I didn't say exactly what's up there. Did y'all notice that? Students are quick to say, well, you worded it different. But you know what part of the nervous system the spinal cord is part of. Okay, so sensory signals transmit, sensory division transmits signals from receptors to the CNS, and motor from the CNS to an effector. Okay, so now let's look at the subdivisions of each of these. So the sensory division, and notice you also have afferent. So just know that afferent is the same as sensory. Sometimes I'll use afferent division, sometimes I'll use sensory. So just make sure you know they mean the same. And then efferent with an E is motor. It means away from. Okay? The CNS. So the sensory, if you look up here, it says the sensory division is further divided into somatic sensory and visceral sensory division. So you not only have a sensory division, can you all see that? Okay. So you have visceral sensory and somatic. Okay. So visceral, you all have seen the word viscera, visceral this, visceral that in 201. What is visceral referring to? Right, so you have visceral membranes, visceral pericardium, visceral pleura. So visceral always refers to the organs within the ventral body cavity. Does that ring a bell? So the organs in the ventral body cavity are referred to as viscera. So what are some of the organs in the ventral body cavity? Right. So good. What are the divisions, the subdivisions of the ventral cavity? Right. So you have thoracic and abdominal pelvic. So all of the organs in those cavities are referred to as viscera. Okay? So when we say visceral sensory, so it's still sensory, which means the signal is going to start where? Sensory. Receptors. Okay? So all we're talking about when we say visceral sensory division, these are going to transmit a signal from receptors that are on those organs of the ventral body cavity. So internal organs, when you have chest pain, stomach pain from drinking too much milk and you're lactose intolerant. So those pains are going to be caused by activation of pain receptors on those organs. Okay, so that's what we mean by visceral sensory division. They transmit signals from visceral organs, so internal body organs. Okay, somatic refers to the location of receptors in other parts of the body. And that's going to be the skin, muscles, bones, and joints. So give me an example of something that can happen to you to transmit a signal by way of the somatic sensory division. Yes. Not for somatic. So, well, let me just say first, the only difference between these two, they both obviously start at a receptor. The difference is the location of the receptors. So if the receptor is on an internal organ, then it's the visceral sensory division. If these receptors are on the skin, which is what we talked about earlier, muscles, bones, and joints, then that is going to be the somatic sensory division. So think in terms of pain to those areas. So if you have pain on your skin, what I'm saying is think of something that will cause pain on your skin. A pinch, a burn. Okay, so pinch burns are all going to travel by way of the somatic sensory division. Okay, what about skeletal muscle pain? Cramps. Right, so any pain you feel in your muscle, the stimulus starts at receptors that are on the muscles. Okay, pull muscles, any of those. Bones, bone pain. A broken bone, right? You break a bone, the pain is going to be transmitted by way of the somatic sensory division, and then joints. arthritis, right? Or so any pain originating from the joint. Okay, y'all get it now? So, and this is the part students usually mess up on the quiz. So make sure you all go over this several times between now and Tuesday. And then the motor division also has two subdivisions. Visceral and somatic motor. So the somatic motor division, so the first thing you should think of is motor involves muscle. Okay, effectors. So the difference between these two has to do with which effectors are activated. Okay, so for somatic motor, so what are effectors? Let's go back to that first. Effectors are muscles and glands. Okay, and there are how many types of muscle? Muscle tissue? 3. Skeletal, cardiac, and smooth muscle. Those 3. So in this, all we're doing is telling, okay, which of those muscles is the signal going to? Okay? So the somatic motor division carries a signal to skeletal muscles only. And you can say the somatic motor division is voluntary because skeletal muscles are what? Voluntary. We have control over our skeletal muscles. Name some skeletal muscles. Gastrocnemius, my favorite. Deltoid, biceps. Right, so all of the ones you all learned in 201. Okay, so think of, so that we also have skeletal muscles that move our eye, right? We can move our eyeball when we want to. What about your abdominals? What are these called? Your six pack? That's in the middle. The rectus abdominis. Thank you. And on the sides, the obliques. Right. So are those smooth or skeletal? They're skeletal. Right. So like I said, all the ones you all learned in 201 are skeletal. Okay, so they're called skeletal because most of them are connected to the skeletal system, the bones. But that is one. In fact, the rectus abdominis is the muscles that allow you to sit up, right? So without those, you would have a hard time sitting up. Okay, so if on the test, what I'll say, and like I said, is throw students off. If a signal, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of something. But if a signal is transmitted from the CNS to, trying to think of one that I had on the quiz that threw everybody off. I know what it was. Okay, it was which of these would be part of the somatic or part of the somatic motor division. And I'll have A, B, C, D. And I think one of them was a signal transmitted from the CNS to the heart. That would be down here, right? So the visceral motor division transmits signals to where? Right. Smooth muscle, cardiac muscles, and glands. So the effectors, as we said, for the visceral motor division are smooth muscle, cardiac muscles, and glands. So again, I said on the quiz, which of these would transmit a signal by way of the somatic motor division? So that would rule that one out because somatic motor is going to skeletal muscle. Okay? And one of them that I have used was, so option B might be from receptor to the gastrocnemius. Receptor to gastrocnemius. Gastrocnemius is a muscle, right? Skeletal muscle. Well, have we talked about any division? Huh? I said, which of these would be somatic motor? Was the question. So with that, going from receptor to gastrocnemius, right? Exactly. That's kind of crazy. That's kind of out there. So receptors involve sensory division. So I'm kind of mixing sensory division and motor division. So that obviously would not be somatic motor, because somatic motor carries a signal from where? CNS to the skeletal muscle. Okay? So one good thing you all should do for test taking, if all that stuff throws you off, when you first see which of these is somatic motor, write up above that what somatic motor is. So if you write it down, you'll have CNS to skeletal muscle. And everything that doesn't fall under that, you can just X out. Okay, so that's test taking. All right, so what about from the CNS to the rectus abdominis?
But it is connected to the skeleton, you said, the rectus abdominis.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be similar.
Yeah. So it will be that. Yeah, and so right, because you don't think of it as, but like I said, that's why I'm letting you all know all of the muscles you all learned in 201 are skeletal. What's the difference? So we know cardiac muscle, just the heart. So the only part of the body that has cardiac muscle is the heart. Smooth muscle is not that obvious. But smooth muscle is also what? Involuntary. So we don't control those. So what are some things that move that we have no control over besides the heart? The intestines, right? The stomach. Okay, so mostly the digestive tract is some blood vessels have smooth muscle because they have to dilate, but the pulse is from the contraction of the heart, but that causes stretching of the blood vessel. Okay, the iris, the pupils dilating and constricting, that's controlled by smooth muscle. But pretty much that's all you should think about. Intestines, digestive tract, the blood vessels have smooth muscle, and also the iris. Okay. So is everybody okay on that? Now, yeah, so the visceral motor division is also referred to as the ANS, the autonomic nervous system. And the ANS has a whole chapter that we'll go over, very important. So that's going to be a major part of the second test, the second exam. And so its job, the visceral motor division, so as we said, remember the CNS controls all muscles, right? So the CNS controls the heart, right? And so the ANS is responsible for regulating those activities that we don't really think about. Blood pressure regulation, thermal regulation. Okay, so the body just has that built in. So the way I like to think of the autonomic nervous system is the system that maintains homeostasis. Okay, both the ANS as well as the endocrine system have major roles in homeostasis control. Okay, and so we won't hit on this until we get to that chapter. But you should know that the autonomic nervous system has two subdivisions in and of itself, the sympathetic and parasympathetic, which you all may have heard of before, I'm sure. Did any of you have A&P in high school? Anatomy and physiology. Okay. Yeah. So some students have seen this before, but again, we'll go over it in a few weeks. All right, histology. So the main cell of the nervous tissue is what? The main cell is the neuron, right? So neurons are the main type. So those are the special cells. What makes them so special? Because, exactly. So neurons are those, really the only cells that transmit impulses, signals, great distances. So those are the only cells that are able to do what they do by transmitting electrical signals. Neuroglia, so the nervous system is not only made up of neurons, they're the important cells that actually transmit signals, but without the neuroglia, they wouldn't be able to do their job. So neuroglial cells are the other cells, which are referred to as supporting cells of the nervous system. And there are 6 types of neuroglia: astrocytes, microglial, ependymal cells, oligodendrocytes, satellite cells, and Schwann cells. So notice there are 6 types of neuroglial cells, and 4 of them are found only in the CNS. Okay, so 4 of these types of glial cells are found only in the CNS. The other 2 are found only in the PNS. And for the exam, you'll need to know their individual functions. So overall, these are just the general functions. So they're support cells, which mean they do things like protect and nourish the nervous system, support nervous tissue, aid in cell repair, removal of pathogens and impurities, regulation and composition of fluid around and between the cells. So their job is just as important as the neurons, that of the neurons. 4 types occur in the CNS again, oligodendrocytes. And I don't expect you all to just memorize all of this. The main thing about oligodendrocytes and Schwann cells, so look at oligodendrocytes and Schwann cells. One's in the CNS, the other's in the PNS. And look at their function. So the function of oligodendrocytes is to form the myelin sheath in the CNS. And Schwann cells produce myelin in the PNS. So before we finish today, we're going to talk a lot about myelin. Let's go ahead and take a look. So if you all remember this picture of a neuron, these little things on here are myelin. So myelin sheaths are formed around what part of a neuron? An axon. Okay, so a neuron in the CNS that has myelin, that myelin is made by oligodendrocytes. So if this cell were part of the PNS, they will be made by Schwann cells, right? So myelin, and we'll see they're very important because they allow the signal to travel very fast. Okay. And then you have ependymal cells, and you've heard of CSF, that fluid, right? So the fluid that the brain kind of sits in, and it bathes the brain and spinal cord. Yes, so CSF, if you've had a spinal tap, that's what they're drawing off. So the ependymal cells are responsible for helping with secretion and circulation of CSF. And microglia, they are the macrophages. You hear about macrophages. Those are the cells of the immune system that have the job of locating objects, debris in the body that shouldn't be there, such as germs, bacteria. They eat bacteria or any other pathogens that should not be in the body. So the nervous system is protected by the microglia. The astrocytes have so many functions. So the main thing to know about the astrocytes is that they are the most abundant of all glial cells. So we have more astrocytes than any other. And as you can see, they have the most functions, diverse functions. Okay, so they cover the entire brain surface. And satellite cells, they surround neurosomas, but these are, the satellite cells have a job of regulating the chemical environment of the neuron and provide electrical insulation. So their job is not as defined as the others. Okay, so those are the 6 types of glial cells, and you can see them also here. Okay, so tumors. So tumors occur in the nervous system. So tumors, what is a tumor? What are tumors? So a mass of abnormal cells, right? So cells that grow too rapidly, undergo mitosis when they should not, is basically what they are. So they are a mass, they cause a mass and of rapidly dividing cells. Normally, tumors are prevented from occurring by a mechanism called contact inhibition. So whenever cells have other cells next to them, they stop dividing. So there's no reason for cells to divide unless there's space for them to come into. So with tumors, there is no contact inhibition, as there should be. So the cells recognize that there are cells around them or not, but they still continue to undergo mitosis anyway. So that's what tumors are. And we know that some tumors are cancerous. Those are called what? Malignant tumors. And some are non-cancerous. They're called benign. So benign is non-cancerous, a non-cancerous tumor. Mature neurons have little or no capacity for mitosis and seldomly form tumors. So neurons are special cells, but these cells actually live for our entire lifespan, pretty much. So the neurons that we have now are the ones that we'll have when we're 90 if we live that long. Some of them will die off, but we never make new neurons, which is a bad thing, especially for people who have neurological disorders, spinal cord injuries. So remember, if you all remember the cell cycle, remember you have G1S, G2M, the stages of the cell cycle. So some body cells stop in either G1 or G2, and neurons are one of those. They don't continue through the cycle, so we don't make any anymore. Muscles are the same way, and other tissues of the body. But so neurons, so if we have brain tumors, it's not normally due to neurons because they don't grow anymore. They don't undergo mitosis. But the neuroglia cells, the glial cells, are usually where these tumors originate. So gliomas grow rapidly and are highly malignant. Blood-brain barrier decreases effectiveness of chemotherapy, so it's hard for the drugs to actually cross the blood-brain barrier to attack those gliomas. So treatment is going to involve radiation or surgery. So brain tumors can also arise from the meninges. You all heard of meninges, the protective coverings of the brain and spinal cord. By metastasis from non-neuronal tumors in other organs. So a person can start off with like lung cancer. Lung cancer travels to the bloodstream and then may be sent on to other tissues such as the brain. So a lot of times that's where the origination is, at another organ. Most come from glial cells though, that are still mitotically active throughout life. So neurons are long-lived, 100 years or more, so however long we live, that's how long we have those neurons. They're amitotic. And what do you think that word means? They don't undergo mitosis. Okay, so neurons do not undergo mitosis with very few exceptions. They have a very high metabolic rate. What does that mean? So if you have a high metabolic rate, what does that mean? Your body is using energy more rapidly. So so you can think of the brain as using a very large supply of the energy that we consume. Okay? So they supply oxygen and glucose to the brain. So you know what, and I always like to stop here, and you all will hear me mention oxygen and glucose throughout this semester. Any idea of its importance? Why would I need to talk about oxygen and glucose? What do you know about oxygen and glucose? So oxygen and glucose are important to us. Can we live without either? No. And where do we need for them to be all the time? So we need a constant amount of oxygen and glucose where? Is that all just the brain? Blood? So every cell in our body needs oxygen and glucose, right? So every cell in our body must have a constant supply of oxygen and glucose. I'm talking about my finger, the cells of my finger. They have to receive oxygen and glucose continuously. What happens if they stop receiving oxygen and glucose? They die. Okay, so every single cell in my body needs oxygen and glucose all the time. The brain needs it even more readily. So I can squeeze my finger. You ever wrap something tight around your finger and it starts to change colors? What's happening there? Right, so the blood flowing to my fingertip is not making it there. And what is the blood trying to get to my fingertip? Oxygen and glucose. Okay, so after a while, if I kept that thing on there for 24 hours, I might not wake up the next morning with a fingertip, right? It may be dead. So some parts of the body can stand being without oxygen and glucose for a longer period. The brain is not one of them. So as soon as blood stops going to your brain, in a matter of seconds, you're out. Right? Think of some things that cause sudden death. So a brain aneurysm, what is that? Well, it's not a clot, but so the blood vessel weakens and it forms a bulge, like a weak tire. You ever seen a weak tire that bubbles? So that's a blood vessel, bubbles, and it may burst. So just imagine that blood vessel is carrying oxygen and glucose to a particular part of my brain. Well, now my brain is not, cells are not getting oxygen and glucose, so those cells die. What else causes sudden death? Stroke. A stroke is similar. What's the difference between aneurysm and stroke? So with aneurysm, I think I heard some people say blood clot. A stroke is a blood clot usually. So with a stroke, you have a blood vessel and it gets blocked. So this is like an aneurysm. So that's a blood vessel that has a weak point that bubbles out and it can burst. So if blood is going this way, now it's going to start going what? There. So the blood is not actually getting to the tissue it's supposed to get to. That's an aneurysm. A blood clot, effects are similar. That's when you have something there, blocking blood from getting past that point. So the result is the same. Whatever that blood is carrying oxygen and glucose to is no longer getting oxygen and glucose. So the same thing happens. That part of the tissue is going to die. Okay? Anything else that causes sudden death? Heart attack. So why would a heart attack? What is the... So the heart stops. Now what? So oxygen and glucose isn't getting to any cells. Okay, so all the cells die, starting with the brain, the kidneys, so we can't live anymore after that. Suffocation. What's happening there? Right, so how does oxygen even get in the blood in the first place? Through breathing. When we inhale, that's how oxygen gets into the blood. So if we stop inhaling, there's no more oxygen getting to the brain or other tissues. So we'll get to some of these later, but just so you understand the importance of oxygen and glucose. Now I'm going to take that a step further. Why is it that the cells need oxygen and glucose? Energy. ATP. Good, so y'all know. What about ATP? So what is ATP? So ATP is going to provide the cell with energy, right? For anything to move or do work, it needs energy, right? So a car, what's the energy source for a car? Gasoline, fuel. What's the energy source for this projector? It's like electricity. So everything that moves or does work is going to need energy. ATP is the only thing our body cells can use for energy. So when you think of how cells work, cells are machines. So their job is to continuously have reactions going, and once those stop, the cells die, and then obviously we die. But in order to make ATP is made in our cells by what? Right. So oxygen plus glucose, which is C6H12. I made that up. So C6H12O6 is glucose. So if you know anyone who is diabetic, so if a person is diabetic, sometimes they'll take insulin and their glucose may drop too low. You all ever had that happen? So we have to have, there's a certain level of glucose that we need in the blood at all times. So we don't need it to go too far up or too far down. But the key is that you understand this part, that cells must have oxygen and glucose to make ATP. All right, I didn't mean to get too far off the subject, but I will be bringing that up throughout the semester, so I wanted to go ahead and get that in. All right, clusters of cell bodies. I mentioned that last time. A bundle of cell bodies is called a ganglia. We learned that the other day, but that's in the PNS. So if you have a cluster of cell bodies in the CNS, it's called a nucleus. Okay, and we'll talk more about those in the next couple of chapters. So ganglia in the PNS are the same as nuclei in the CNS. And nerves the same way. So nerves are bundles of what? Axons where? In the PNS. So now we know that In the CNS, bundles of axons are called tracts. Okay, so we'll go over that more in chapter 14. And there's our neuron again, and the Schwann cells are myelin. Myelin. So the myelin sheath is an insulating layer around a nerve fiber. One other key thing here. Any idea what a nerve fiber is? Nerve fiber. So what are nerves? Bundles of axons. So a nerve fiber is just another name for axon. Okay, so an axon is a nerve fiber. In the book, sometimes you'll just see nerve fiber, and it's the same as axon. So you may want to make a mental note of that. We'll jot it down. So they are, myelin is found around axons of some neurons. Not all of them have myelin. And in the CNS, they're formed by oligodendrocytes. In the PNS, they're formed by Schwann cells. So there are several things you should know about myelin for the quiz next week. One of them is which cells actually make the myelin. Schwann cells and oligodendrocytes. The other is where is myelin located? Around what? Around the axon. Right? And what is myelin made of? You see that here. So it's made of those cells, but inside those cells, the cytoplasm is made up of the proteins and the lipids, actually the membrane itself as well. So 80% lipid, 20% protein. Okay, a couple more things. And what else did I say about myelin as far as its function? The insulate is there, but more important than that, doesn't really tell you what it's doing to help the nervous system in any way. Exactly. So myelin, when myelin is on an axon, the signal travels faster. Okay? We'll see how much faster in just a moment. Myelination. So myelination, obviously that word kind of looks like a process. And the process of making myelin is called myelination. Production of the myelin sheath begins during the 14th week of fetal development and proceeds rapidly during infancy, completed at late adolescence. And for that reason, because of the need for that 80% lipid, 20% protein, dietary fat is important to the nervous system's development because that myelination requires fats or lipids for the brain development. So it is said for infants and children, you should not completely take fat out of their diet, like low fat this, low fat that. They do need the fat in their diet. Formation of the myelin sheath. So this just shows you the myelination process and how you can see the Schwann cell wraps itself around the axon in that way. And what we'll also see is that, as we said before, the conduction speed depends on the presence or absence of myelin. Okay, so the speed of a signal traveling along the axon depends on the presence or absence of myelin, but it also depends on the diameter of the axon, the diameter of the nerve fiber. Okay, so the larger the diameter, the faster the signal. The smaller the diameter, the slower the signal. The presence of myelin increases the speed of the signal. Absence of myelin makes the signal travel slower. Signal conduction occurs along the surface of the axon. Larger fibers have more surface area, and that allows them to conduct the signal much faster. And this is just a great example of a visual to allow you to see how fast axons are actually going to allow signals to travel along their path. So if you compare three of your neurons in your body, those neurons that are small and unmyelinated, so they have a small diameter and no myelin, which means these are the slowest of our neurons, the signal travels up to about 2 meters per second. Think about how fast that is. If you have a meter stick, so a meter stick is about this length. So a signal, this is your neuron, and you don't have a neuron 2 meters long, okay, unless you're 7 feet tall or something. But a signal can travel from the end of this meter stick and back in 1 second. That's pretty fast for a slow neuron, right? If you have one that is small but myelinated, it's a little bit faster. That would be 15 meters per second. So that would be like laying out 15 meter sticks, and the signal can get from the beginning to the end in 1 second. 15 meter sticks. And look at this one. Amazingly fast. So a neuron that has a larger diameter and contains myelin can transmit a signal. How fast? Can't even think about that. So down the length of a football field in 1 second. Okay, even longer than a football field, I think. From the end zone to the end zone, I think is more like what you have there. So that's why when you're touched, you feel it immediately, right? So again, we don't have a neuron that's 120 meters long, but the neurons we have are transmitting a signal that rapidly. So there is no lag time between you actually activating a receptor and the signal getting to your brain so that you recognize it. Okay? So where do we have these different types of neurons? So those small unmyelinated fibers transmit slower signals, but these neurons are found in areas where the signal doesn't have to be rapid, right? Supply the stomach and dilate the pupils. So if you think of someone's pupils constricting or dilating, you can look at someone, put a light in their eye, and you can see what's happening. Right, you can actually see the pupils constrict. So that's controlled by slower signals. Okay? And there's really no reason for that to be lightning fast. So whoever built the body, I guess, put the slower ones in the areas where it was no need for them to be so fast. And so the stomach, your gastric activity, all of that is controlled by slower neurons. And then the fast signals supply skeletal muscle and also transport the sensory signals for vision and balance. So it's obvious then that when you look at something, you see it instantly. It doesn't take a few seconds to get the signal to the part of your brain. So it's important for those signals to be fast. Also skeletal muscles, that's how you have precision. Your muscles move as soon as you have the thought of moving the muscles. Not a whole lot of time between me saying I'm going to pick up this pen and actually the correct muscles are getting the signal for me to make those movements. So those would need to be on run along faster fibers. Okay? So some of the diseases, the main disease of the myelin sheath is multiple sclerosis, MS. And with MS, the myelin on the axon start to deteriorate. So just right off the bat, before you look at anything else. So if we said myelin has what function? Speeding up the signal. So if we start losing myelin, what happens? So the signal slows down. Okay, so in MS, the oligodendrocytes and myelin sheaths in the CNS start to deteriorate. And myelin is replaced by hardened scar tissue. That's what the sclerosis means. And the nerve conduction is disrupted. So that affects vision, causing double vision, because the signal, for us to see, the signal has to make it from the receptor in our eye to the back of our brain, and that signal is just not traveling as fast as it should, or it may travel faster in some parts than other parts, one eye than the other. So it causes double vision, tremors, so you don't really have control over the muscles contracting when you want them to, so they contract slower, and individuals may start falling because they're expecting their leg to move when it always did move, but the signal is not getting there fast, so there may be a lot of accidents that way. Numbness, speech defects, so these are all effects of MS. Usually MS shows up between the ages of 20 and 40, and fatal from 25 to 30 years after diagnosis. And the cause is thought to be autoimmune triggered. Sometimes a virus can go in, and the immune system may think that the myelin is foreign and start attacking the myelin. You all have heard of autoimmune diseases. So if a disease is said to be autoimmune, that means our immune system, which is supposed to attack invaders, is starting to attack our own tissues. So that is thought to be a cause. Another disorder of myelin, the myelin sheath, is Tay-Sachs disease. And this is a hereditary disorder of infants of Eastern European Jewish ancestry. And here, the degeneration is caused by an abnormal accumulation of a particular type of glycolipid within the myelin sheath. And again, that's going to affect the signal conduction of those fibers. This one is fatal before the age of 4, so you don't see adults with Tay-Sachs. Okay. And so you all should know from those 3 pages the difference between sensory neurons, motor neurons, and interneurons. So a sensory neuron is a neuron that transmits a signal in basically which direction? From the receptor to the CNS. Very good. Okay? And it says conducts impulses to the spinal cord and or brain. That's the same as CNS. Motor neuron transmits a signal from CNS to the effector. Okay? So we're just saying the same thing as those divisions, sensory division, motor division. Well, the sensory division has sensory neurons. The motor division has motor neurons. Okay, and then interneurons. So the thing to know about interneurons is that these are the neurons that are going to stay within the CNS. So if you look at this picture, how many neurons do you see? So this is one neuron, and you can see that synapse, and then you have a second neuron, and then another synapse, and a third neuron. So by the headings here, you can see the left is green, the right side is blue. So the green side represents the PNS, the peripheral nervous system. So you can see that a sensory neuron is in both the PNS and CNS, right? Part of the neuron is in the PNS, and the other part is in the CNS. Interneurons stay where? In the CNS, so that second neuron is only in the blue part. And then this third neuron, part of it is in the CNS and the other part is in the PNS. So that's sensory neurons, motor neurons, and interneurons. Okay, and make sure you all are aware of the connective tissues layers involving a nerve. And you all may remember with muscles, you had what? Epimysium, perimysium, endomysium. So you have sort of the same things on nerves. So know, for example, which of those connective tissue layers covers the entire nerve. And you can see here that that is the what? Epineurium covers the entire nerve. The perineurium covers smaller fascicles. So inside the nerve you have other smaller bundles of axons, which are called fascicles. And those fascicles are covered by perineurium. And then each axon is covered by endoneurium. So that covers the axon and the myelin sheath. Okay. So on Tuesday, I'll pick up on the nerve impulse. See if you all can look over that ahead of me. But the quiz is going to be on anything we've covered up to this point. And those 3 pages still. All right.